When 12-year-old Maya Thompson pushed open the heavy glass door of Prestige Jewelry on Fifth Avenue, her small fingers trembled at the stark contrast between the air-conditioned warmth and the bitter cold of the New York street. She clutched a small wooden box, her most precious treasure, to her chest as her wide eyes took in the sight of this world of luxury that seemed to exist on another planet. The interior of the jewelry store was a temple of white marble and soft lighting, where diamonds sparkled in climate-controlled display cases, and the silence was broken only by the whisper of elegant conversation. Maya, in her slightly oversized second-hand coat and worn sneakers, stood out like a discordant note in a symphony of opulence. The few customers present, elegant ladies with designer handbags and men in tailored suits, turned to look at the black girl who seemed so out of place. Their glances were not necessarily hostile, but they carried that cold, distant curiosity reserved for those who clearly do not belong. "Can I help you?" asked a middle-aged saleswoman, approaching with a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her voice carried that polite tone adults use with children when they want them to feel quickly dismissed. Maya took a deep breath, remembering the words she had rehearsed during the 40-minute walk from her apartment in the Bronx. I would like to sell this," she said in a trembling voice, carefully opening the wooden box. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, was a pearl necklace. It wasn't extravagant, but there was something about the way the pearls caught the light that suggested genuine quality. Maya had found the necklace in her mother's drawer 3 days earlier while looking for medical documents. "My mother is very ill," Maya continued, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "She needs special treatment, and I don't have any money. She always said this necklace was a family heirloom, that it had sentimental value, but maybe." Richard Sterling, 42, owner of Prestige Jewelry, was helping a customer when he noticed the quiet commotion near the entrance. The heir to a dynasty of jewelers, Richard had taken over the family business 5 years earlier when his father retired. His first reaction was mild irritation. Unaccompanied children rarely meant real sales. But something about the girl's demeanor made him pause. There was a dignity in the way she held the necklace, a quiet determination that belied her age. Richard approached, politely dismissing the saleswoman. "Hello," he said, bending down slightly to meet Maya's eyes. "I'm Richard Sterling, I own this store. Can I see what you brought in?" Maya held out the box with careful hands, as if offering her heart. "My mom, Carmen, is in the hospital. The doctor said she needs experimental treatment that insurance won't cover. It costs $15,000, and I don't know what else to do." Richard took the necklace delicately and immediately felt the characteristic weight of genuine pearls. Under the store's lighting, he could see the silky luster that only high-quality cultured pearls possess. Even more intriguing was the clasp, platinum with a small mark that he recognized as being from the Cartier jewelry store in the 1950s. "Can you tell me more about your mother?" Richard asked gently, still examining the necklace. "How did she get this necklace?" Maya bit her lower lip, a gesture that revealed her anxiety. "Mom always worked as a cleaning lady in offices. She never had much, but she always said that our family had a special history, that we came from a better place. This necklace belonged to my great-grandmother, and she always promised that one day she would tell me the whole story." "And now she can't tell you?" Richard asked, noticing how the girl's eyes filled with tears. "She's unconscious most of the time. The doctor said that without treatment she—" Maya couldn't finish the sentence. Richard felt something stir in his chest. At 42, he had become an expert at appraising not only jewelry, but the human stories that went with it. There was something about this situation that reminded him of his own childhood, when his family had faced financial hardship and nearly lost their store. "Maya, this necklace is very special," he said finally. "More special than you can imagine. I need to do some checks to give you an accurate value. Could you come back tomorrow?" "Tomorrow may be too late," Maya replied, tears now streaming down her face. "Please, Mr. Sterling. I just need $15,000. If it's worth more than that, you can keep the rest. I just want to save my mother." It was at that moment that Richard Sterling made a decision that would change not only Maya's life, but his own. Looking at that brave girl who had crossed the city to save her mother, he saw something he had forgotten existed: the purity of unconditional love and the strength that comes from despair turned into determination. If you're following this story of courage and filial love, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because what Richard was about to discover about that necklace and Maya's family would change everything in ways neither of them could have imagined. "Maya," Richard said gently, "I'm going to help you. But first, I need to tell you what I found out about this necklace. He led the girl to his personal desk in the back of the store, away from the prying eyes of other customers. With a professional magnifying glass, Richard examined each pearl individually, then focused on the platinum clasp. This is no ordinary necklace, he began, his voice laden with an emotion Maya couldn't quite place. The pearls are genuine Mikimoto, cultivated in Japan in the 1950s. The clasp is original Cartier. Maya, this necklace is worth approximately $85,000. Maya blinked several times, as if she hadn't heard correctly. $85,000. That can't be right. My mother is a cleaning lady. We live in a one-bedroom apartment. How could she have something so valuable? Richard smiled gently. That's exactly what we need to find out. But first, let's take care of your mother's immediate problem. Which hospital? Mount Sinai, Maya replied, still in shock. Richard took his phone and, to Maya's surprise, called the hospital directly. Within 15 minutes, he had spoken to 3 different people, including the doctor in charge of Carmen Thompson's case. Your mother's treatment has been approved and will be paid for in full, Richard announced. The surgery will take place tomorrow morning. Maya looked at him with wide eyes. But, how? Why? You don't even know me. Richard sat down in the chair next to her. Maya, in the last 10 years of running this store, I've learned that some people come in here by chance, others out of necessity, and some are sent by fate. You're different from all the kids I've ever met. Different how? Maya asked, still clutching the necklace as if it were a talisman. You crossed the entire city alone, to try to save your mother. You were willing to give up your family's only inheritance. That's not just courage, Maya. It's the kind of love that builds great stories. Richard paused for a moment, gathering his thoughts. I have a proposal for you. While your mother is recovering, I would like you to come here after school. Not to work, you're too young for that, but to learn. About jewelry, about stories, about how to identify hidden treasures. Why would you do that for me? Maya asked, her natural distrust as a child raised in adversity surfacing. Because, Richard said, looking directly into her eyes, when I was your age, my family almost lost everything. A stranger helped us, not because he had to, but because he recognized something special in our situation. Now it's my turn to do the same. 2 weeks later, while Carmen Thompson was successfully recovering from surgery, Maya had become a regular presence at Prestige Jewelry. She arrived every day at 4 p.m. after school, and spent 2 hours learning about gems, precious metals, and most importantly, the stories behind each piece. Richard discovered that Maya had an impressive photographic memory and a natural intuition for recognizing quality and authenticity. Even more surprising was her ability to connect with customers, especially those who came to the store with complex personal stories. Richard, Maya said one afternoon as she arranged a display of antique rings, can I ask you a question? Always. Why did you really help me? And don't tell me it was just kindness. Richard smiled. The girl was learning to read people with the same precision with which she read jewelry. Do you want the whole truth? Maya nodded. When you walked in here that first day, I saw something I had forgotten existed in this business. You didn't come here to impress anyone or to buy something you didn't need. You came with a pure mission, to save someone you love. It reminded me of why my grandfather started this store in 1923. How so? He didn't start out to sell jewelry to rich people. He started because he believed that every person deserved to have something beautiful in their life, something that told their story. Over the years, we lost that. We became just another expensive store for people who already have everything. Maya reflected on this as she carefully polished a vintage brooch. And now I'm thinking about making some changes. And I'd like your help. Just then, the shop door opened and an elegantly dressed elderly man entered, carrying a silver-handled cane. He was about 75 years old, with perfectly combed white hair and blue eyes that seemed to have seen decades of stories. Excuse me, he said in a polite but firm voice. My name is Edward Cartwright. I understand that you recently appraised a Mikimoto pearl necklace with a Cartier clasp from the 1950s. Maya and Richard exchanged glances. How did this man know about the necklace? May I ask how you heard about it? Richard asked, his voice professional but cautious. The man smiled sadly. Because that necklace belonged to my daughter. A daughter I lost 30 years ago and have been searching for ever since. And I believe I have found not only the necklace, but also my granddaughter. His eyes fixed on Maya with an intensity that made the girl's heart race. The silence in the jewelry store was deafening. Maya felt her legs weaken, and Richard instinctively positioned himself beside her, a protective hand on her shoulder. Your granddaughter? Maya whispered, her voice almost inaudible. Edward Cartwright approached slowly, his eyes never leaving Maya's face. You have my daughter Isabella's eyes. And from what I can see, you also have her courage. Richard intervened, his voice firm but respectful. Mr. Cartwright, I understand that this is an emotional situation, but you need to understand that Maya is a minor. Any conversation about family needs to include her mother. That's exactly what I expect, Edward replied. How is Carmen? I heard she had recent surgery. Maya took a step back, frightened. How do you know my mother's name? How do you know about the surgery? Edward sighed deeply, as if carrying the weight of decades. Because I've been looking for you both for 15 years. Ever since I found out that Isabella had left. Isabella was my mother, Maya asked, confusion evident in her voice. My mother's name is Carmen. Carmen Isabella Cartwright Thompson, Edward said softly. She changed her name when she left home at 16. We argued about many things. I was young, arrogant, and didn't accept her choices. When she got pregnant, I disowned her. It was the biggest mistake of my life. Richard watched the situation unfold, ready to intervene if necessary. There was something about the old man's sincerity that seemed genuine, but his experience told him to be cautious. Do you have proof? Richard asked. Edward opened a leather folder he was carrying and took out several old photographs. In the first one, a young black woman in her 20s smiled at the camera, wearing the exact same necklace Maya had brought to the store. The face was unmistakably similar to Carmen's. This is Isabella at age 18, Edward explained. And this, he showed another photo, is the necklace I gave her on her 16th birthday, shortly before our fight. Maya took the photos with trembling hands. The resemblance to her mother was striking, but there was something else, something about the expression, the smile, that she recognized in the mirror every day. My mother never talked about family, Maya said, her voice heavy with emotion. She always said it was just the two of us against the world. Edward sat down heavily in a nearby chair. Because I hurt her deeply. When she fell in love with your father, a man I considered unsuitable at the time, I forbade her to see him. When she got pregnant, I said terrible things. Things I can't take back. And now you show up? Maya asked, a surprising anger emerging in her voice. After my mother almost died? After I had to sell your necklace to save her? Now I show up, Edward confirmed, because I finally understand that family isn't about approval or social status. It's about love. And I love you both, even though I never had the chance to show it. Richard decided it was time to bring some practicality to the emotional situation. Mr. Cartwright, assuming all of this is true, what is your intention? Edward looked directly at Maya. I want to get to know my granddaughter. I want to help Carmen, Isabella, recover completely. And I want to correct 30 years of mistakes. How? Maya asked, still suspicious. First, by ensuring that her mother has the best medical care possible during her recovery. Second, by offering you both the life you should have had from the beginning. Third, he paused, overcome with emotion. By asking forgiveness for decades of stupid pride. Maya looked to Richard for guidance. The jeweler had become a father figure in recent weeks, and she trusted his judgment. What do you think? She asked Richard. I think you should talk to your mother first, Richard replied. When she's strong enough. This decision can't be made by you alone. Edward nodded. That's fair. But can I ask you something? Can I meet Carmen? Even if it's just to apologize. Maya considered this for a long moment. Finally, she nodded. You can come with us to the hospital. But if my mother says no, you'll accept that and leave. I will, Edward agreed immediately. At the hospital, Carmen Thompson was awake for the first time in days, sitting in a chair next to the bed. When she saw Edward enter the room behind Maya and Richard, her face changed. First shock, then anger, and finally something that could be described as old pain resurfacing. "Dad," she said simply, her voice weak but laden with 30 years of unresolved emotions. Edward began to cry the moment he heard the word. "Isabella, my daughter, Carmen," she corrected him gently. "My name is Carmen now." "Carmen," he repeated, respecting her choice. Can I ask for your forgiveness?" What happened in the next few minutes changed not only the family dynamics of the Thompson-Cartwrights, but also planted the seeds of a transformation that would affect hundreds of other families in the decades to come. The conversation in the hospital room lasted 3 hours. Maya watched, fascinated and sometimes frightened, as her mother and her newly discovered grandfather navigated their way through 3 decades of hurt, misunderstanding, and repressed love. Carmen told him about the years of struggle, raising Maya alone after the girl's father died in a work accident when she was only 2 years old. She spoke of the nights working double shifts as a cleaner, of the times she skipped meals to make sure Maya had food, of the dreams she had held for her daughter. Edward, for his part, revealed a tireless search. Private detectives, discreet investigations, attempts to locate Isabella, Carmen, that always ran into dead ends or outdated information. He had become, in his own words, a man haunted by his own mistakes. "Dad," Carmen finally said, using the word for the first time in decades, "why now? Why not when Maya was born? Why not when I needed you?" Edward hung his head. "Because I was a proud fool who believed you would come back apologizing. When I realized that wasn't going to happen, it was too late. You had disappeared completely." Maya, who had remained silent for most of the conversation, finally spoke. "Grandpa Edward," she said, testing the word, "what do you want from us now?" Edward looked at the 2 women who were all he had left in his family. "I want a second chance. I want to be the father I should have been and the grandfather I never got to be. And I want to use everything I have to make sure you never have to go through the hardships you faced." "We don't want charity," Carmen said, her fierce independence still intact despite her physical weakness. "It's not charity," Edward replied. "It's family. It's inheritance. It's justice." Richard, who had remained discreetly in the back of the room, stepped forward. "If I may suggest," he said, "perhaps you don't need to decide everything right now. Carmen needs to recover completely. Maya needs to process all this information. And Mr. Cartwright, you need to prove that your intentions are genuine through actions, not just words." "What do you suggest?" Edward asked. "A transition period," Richard replied. "Maya continues to come to the store after school. She has an impressive natural talent. Carmen, when she's recovered, might consider working with us as well. And Mr. Cartwright, you can start by building real relationships instead of trying to make up for lost decades all at once." Maya looked at Richard gratefully. He had become more than a mentor. He was the wise mediator her family needed. "What about the inheritance?" Carmen asked, ever practical. Edward smiled for the first time since he had entered the room. "The inheritance isn't going anywhere. But perhaps we can use it for something more meaningful than simply transferring money." "Like what?" "Maya," Edward addressed his granddaughter, "Richard told me about your special ability to identify stories in jewelry. And about how you connect with people who come to the store with difficult situations." Maya nodded, curious to see where this was going. "How about we create something together? A foundation that helps families in medical crises, especially children who have to make adult decisions to save their parents." Maya's eyes lit up. "Like a bigger version of what Richard did for us." "Exactly. The Isabella Cartwright Foundation, named after your mother, could provide not only financial assistance, but also guidance and emotional support for children in situations similar to yours." Carmen looked at her daughter, then at her father, and finally at Richard. "And you, Richard? Would you be a part of this?" Richard smiled. "Carmen, in the last few weeks, Maya has brought more life and purpose to my shop than I've felt in years. If you want me as a partner in this journey, it would be an honor." 2 months later, Carmen was fully recovered and working as a family relations coordinator at Prestige Jewelry, which had become a kind of discreet community center where people with family jewelry could receive honest appraisals and, if necessary, compassionate assistance. Maya, now 13, divided her time between school, the store, and the early work of the foundation. She had developed a unique ability to identify not only the financial value of jewelry, but the emotional stories it carried. Edward had moved into a nearby apartment, not to intrude on their lives, but to be available when they needed him. He quietly funded dozens of medical treatments through the foundation, never seeking public recognition. But the real transformation was just beginning. What none of them knew yet was that the small foundation they had created was about to become a national movement, and that Maya's story, the brave girl who sold pearls to save her mother, would inspire thousands of other families to find strength in their most difficult moments. 5 years later, Maya Thompson Cartwright, now 17, stood on stage at Lincoln Center, being introduced as the youngest winner of the National Youth Philanthropy Award. The Isabella Cartwright Foundation had grown to become one of the most respected family healthcare organizations in the country, having helped more than 3,000 families. In the auditorium, Carmen sat in the front row next to Edward, whom she now affectionately called Dad again. Beside them, Richard watched proudly as the young woman who had walked into his store as a desperate child had become a force for social change. When I was 12, Maya began her speech, her clear, confident voice echoing through the packed auditorium. I thought I was selling a necklace to save my mother. I didn't know I was actually buying a future, not just for us, but for thousands of other families. In the audience, dozens of families who had been helped by the foundation listened with tears in their eyes. There was Mrs. Rodriguez, whose son had needed emergency heart surgery. There was also 14-year-old Tommy Kim, who had walked 20 kilometers to sell his grandfather's watch to get medicine for his diabetic sister. The Isabella Cartwright Foundation, Maya continued, isn't just about money. It's about seeing the true value in people when they can't see it in themselves. It's about understanding that courage comes in all sizes and ages. After the event, the family gathered in the apartment that Carmen and Maya still kept in the Bronx, not out of financial necessity, but as a reminder of where they had started. Edward had often offered to buy them a mansion, but they both preferred the home they had built together. Maya, Edward said, pouring tea into a porcelain cup that had belonged to his wife, your grandmother Isabella would be so proud of you. Not just for the foundation, but for the woman you are becoming. Maya smiled, playing with the pearl necklace she now wore regularly, not the original, which was on permanent display in the store as a symbol of the family's history, but a replica Edward had made. Grandpa, can I ask you a question I've always wanted to ask? Always. Did you really look for us for 15 years, or only after you found out about the necklace? Edward smiled, recognizing his granddaughter's perceptiveness. I looked for you for 30 years, Maya. But it wasn't until Richard mentioned the necklace to a network of jewelers that I finally had a real lead. Your name was in hospital records I had never been able to access before. Carmen, who was organizing photos from the ceremony, stopped to listen. The truth, Edward continued, is that I hired detectives, placed discreet ads, even offered rewards. But your mother was very clever in completely changing her identity. Isabella Cartwright had disappeared completely, and Carmen Thompson was a whole new person. Why didn't you give up? Maya asked. Because, Edward replied, looking at Carmen, when you truly love someone, there is no giving up. There is only continuing to try until you find a way. Richard, who had joined them for dinner, raised his glass of water. Here's to proof that sometimes the best families are the ones we choose to build together, he said. And to second chances, Carmen added. And to the brave girls who force us to be better, Edward concluded. 10 years later, Maya was in her senior year at Harvard Law School, specializing in family law and nonprofit organizations. The Isabella Cartwright Foundation had expanded to 20 states and inspired the creation of similar programs internationally. Richard had married Carmen 3 years earlier in a simple but moving ceremony at Prestige Jewelry. Edward had walked Carmen down the aisle, finally fulfilling a fatherly role he had lost decades earlier. The store had become something of an urban legend, a place where miracles happened for families in despair. Not because Richard and his team performed magic, but because they had created a space where human stories were valued as much as precious stones. At her desk at Harvard, Maya was finishing her thesis on strategic philanthropy and social transformation, using her own story as her main case study. The 200-page document analyzed how small acts of kindness, when structured properly, can create waves of social change that perpetuate themselves for generations. The difference between charity and transformation, she wrote in her conclusion, is not in the amount of resources available, but in the quality of the human connection established. When I saw my mother lying unconscious in that hospital bed, I wasn't just trying to save her physically. I was fighting to preserve our family, our dreams, our dignity. Mr. Richard Sterling didn't just buy a necklace or pay a medical bill. He recognized potential where others saw only need. My grandfather Edward didn't just offer money or social status. He chose vulnerability and humility over pride and control. And my mother Carmen didn't just accept help. She had the courage to rebuild bridges she had burned decades ago, teaching me that forgiveness isn't about forgetting the past, but about choosing a different future. That night, Maya called home, the apartment in the Bronx that the family had kept as a memento, but which now also served as the foundation's local headquarters. "Mom," she said when Carmen answered, "I just turned in my thesis." "And how does it feel?" Maya looked out the window of her dorm room at Harvard, watching other students walk across campus with their typical concerns of privileged young people. "I feel like I finally understand why everything happened the way it did. It wasn't luck, Mom. It was a series of people choosing to see possibilities instead of limitations." "That's pretty deep for a Thursday night phone call," Carmen laughed. "But I'm proud of you, sweetheart. I always have been." "That's pretty deep for a Thursday night phone call," Carmen laughed. "But I'm proud of you, sweetie. I always have been." "Mom, when I finish college, I want to expand the foundation internationally. I want kids in other countries to have the same opportunities we've had." "And will you need help?" "I need a family," Maya replied. "And I have the best family in the world." After hanging up, Maya picked up a photo from the table, the entire family at the opening of the foundation's 10th branch. Carmen and Richard holding hands, Edward with his proud smile, and herself holding a certificate of recognition. But what moved her most about the photo wasn't the smiles or the achievements. It was the small detail in the corner, dozens of other families in the background, each with their own story of transformation, each representing the multiplier effect of a simple act of kindness. On her graduation day at Harvard, Maya wore the original pearl necklace. Edward had insisted she take it to the ceremony. During her speech as class valedictorian, she held up the necklace and said, "This necklace was once my most desperate possession and my last hope. Today, it is my daily reminder that we never know how our actions can transform not only our own lives, but the lives of future generations." When I was 12, I thought I was selling a family heirloom. In fact, I was investing in a much greater inheritance, the proof that love, courage, and compassion are the only currencies that truly matter in this world. And for anyone watching this and facing their own moment of despair, remember, sometimes our greatest treasure is hidden exactly where we least expect to find it. Sometimes the person who will change our life is waiting behind the next door we have the courage to open. The Isabella Cartwright Foundation continued to grow, but always remained true to its core mission, to see the true value in people when they need it most, and to turn moments of despair into opportunities for hope. And it all started with a brave 12-year-old girl who loved her mother so much that she was willing to sacrifice her most precious possession. Little did she know that in doing so, she was actually discovering treasures far greater than any jewel could ever be. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment telling us about a time when a child's courage inspired you. Sometimes the greatest heroes come in the smallest packages, and the biggest transformations begin with the simplest gestures of love. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that even in the most difficult moments, there is always the possibility of a miracle, especially when we have enough courage to ask for help and enough wisdom to accept it when it comes. Remember, your story could also be the beginning of the transformation someone else is waiting for. Never underestimate the power of an act of kindness at the right moment.